Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Nada. I'm with Coalition for Civil Freedoms. I am the Prisoner and Family Support Coordinator. Ramadan Mubarak and Kul aam wa antum bi khair. I hope everyone's had a successful Ramadan, and I hope everyone's, ending strong in the last few days. Thank you so much for joining us for our Ramadan Behind Bars webinar, where we get to talk and, discuss the different issues that Muslim prisoners are facing and the discrimination that they face during Ramadan and, outside of Ramadan, but I guess just more specifically within the month of Ramadan. The idea of this webinar was basically inspired because every year CCF collects donations, and we send $100, Ramadan gifts to each of the prisoners that we support, which is almost over 240. And it's just, something small that gets them by through the month or, a little bit afterwards. And so the list that we have in which we have compiled all these prisoners is called the Ramadan list. So we thought it would be really important and a good idea to kind of just narrow in and investigate the actual struggles that Muslim prisoners face, especially during the month of Ramadan. So with us is former political prisoner Sabri Benkahla. Sabri Benkahla is a theologian, lecturer of Islamic studies and civil rights advocate. He graduated with honors from George Mason University with a degree in international studies and comparative religion. He has studied Arabic, Quran, and Islamic studies in Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. He also studied Arabic and Sharia law, which is Islamic law, at the Islamic University of Medina, and pursued graduate studies in international relations and economics at Johns Hopkins University. Sabri is a former political prisoner and considers it his life mission to spread beneficial knowledge and to strive to protect and encourage civil liberties for everyone, especially the oppressed. Also with us today is Sheikh Rami Nsour. Sheikh Rami Nsour is the co-founder of the Tayba Foundation, and which is the first organization in the United States to offer distance learning programs in Islamic education to incarcerated men and women. Sheikh Rami has an extensive experience in curriculum development, specifically character or akhlaq, and he holds a BA in human development with a focus in early childhood. He also obtained an MA, master's degree in educational psychology. I'm very thrilled to amplify the work of these amazing organizers and organizations, and I will look forward to being in conversation with them and learning from you guys. So to start off, I just wanted to take an opportunity to let each of you kind of introduce yourselves or speak for yourselves and your organization or affiliations and the work that you do. Somebody, do you want to start?
Sure. Sabri Benkahla, I mean, you pretty much read my background, alhamdulillah. Currently, I work with Al Huda School, Dar es Salaam, Maryland, as an Islamic studies teacher. So maybe Brother Rami can help me out with some curriculum development, inshallah. And I take opportunities when given the opportunity to speak about, my experiences being incarcerated unjustly, and I'm not doing as much as I want to be doing. Obviously, the coronavirus lockdown kind of threw a wrench and everything, but currently that's my main focus. I teach at a local masjid called Dar al-Hijrah, and I work with other area masajid and people in Islamic studies, and try to bring some awareness to the plight of Muslims who are, being incarcerated unjustly. That's what I'm doing currently.
Thank you, Sabri. Sheikh Rami.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you, Sister Neda, for organizing this and for the invitation. I'm honored to be part and speak alongside Brother Sabri and Sister Zainab and yourself. I just want to say, for the work that I'm doing, and now, understanding the realities of the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, all of the government use of the industrialization of prison, whether it's like for cheap labor, people paying 4 or 5 cents an hour, or just the tax money that they're collected, whether it's $30,000 to $60,000 per person, 500,000 in the medical facilities, over $1 million in the supermax. A lot of money is to be made just housing a human being in prison, and I haven't seen any research, and I'm interested to see if the annual residual income that the states make off of the tax dollars, if it's more than what slave owners made on individual slaves in the fields. I would venture to say they're making more money today per prisoner housing them in prison. I can speak on all that, and I know like the realities of mass incarceration, the dehumanization and so forth, but I didn't get started in this work to understand and to alleviate that. Really, I was at the time I was a talib al-ilm, full-time seeker of knowledge, and a brother had sent some questions from a prison, and he said, oh, could you answer these? And I thought these were going to be like really basic questions, you know, basic tahara, basic purification, basic prayer. And then I was floored when he started asking about usul al-fiqh, foundational principles of fiqh, mustalah al-hadith, technical terminology of hadith. And I was like, wow. He said, there's a lot going on in prison. So I just mentioned that to say, you know, my connection to the prison started as fellow seekers of knowledge working together, but then it led into this.
That's great. And I might have some questions for you later that prisoners have asked me in regards to Islam. But yeah, so thank you so much for all of those introductions. You know, to kind of just get started with the nature of the webinar, I wanted to start by asking Sabri, if he's still with us, what his experience was like, you know, being incarcerated and being Muslim, and you know, what struggles he had to endure and what issues he faced just in like practicing his faith while incarcerated.
Yes, I have a quick problem to address. If I can come back in 1 minute.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, no worries.
Sorry.
Okay, then we'll kind of go into other questions. But so I guess Rami, if you can both just speak to like issues that you've seen in dealing with prisoners, you know, just like what have they expressed to you that they're facing and enduring.
The issue of the Qur'ans, you know, in some prisons, the Bibles are free at the commissary or they're distributed free. And there's so many volunteers coming in from the churches. And unfortunately, the Muslim community has yet to catch up in that area. But as Sister Zainab mentioned, yeah, the cost is more. Sometimes the availability is less. In one prison, we just recently found out I think it was in New Jersey, they listed one of the translations of the Quran in the hate material. So alongside the Satanic Bible was the translation of the Quran. And so I shared that with CARE, and alhamdulillah, they're addressing that. But those are some of the issues. And over the years, I spoke with a brother who got out of prison after 20 years. He saw a 115 in California, which is a disciplinary action note from 1968 for a person having a possession of the Holy Quran. So there is still, I mean, whether it's 1968 or 2022, there's still issues in getting Qur'ans. In terms of the fasting, some of the things that I hear, of course, Brother Sabri can speak on this better from his experience, but from what we've heard from people inside, it's like just the suhoor packets that they don't get. So in Ramadan, the time of the chow hall is, it's like if it's 8, 12, and 4 for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and your pre-dawn meal, the suhoor and the iftar is not matching up to that, they're like, well, tough luck. And it's not like all prisons will allow you to go to the chow hall, take some food and bring it back to the prison. Some prisons won't allow people to do that. And so that's one of the big issues, like just having that. Then there's also the issues of being able to congregate. We take for granted that we could go to the masjid and pray in jama'ah or pray with our family. And now with COVID, they're stuck in their cells, and it's essentially solitary confinement conditions to be stuck in your cell for now over a year with very little movement. So, but some prisons do allow it. Some of the prisons where they're vaccinating now more, but even before that, congregating to break iftar, jama'ah, prayer and congregation, all of these things that we don't even think about in our daily ibadah schedule and our daily worship is sometimes a hurdle. Like there has to be lawsuits filed. People have to go in and fight and sue the prison for the right to have a pre-dawn meal, for the right to break fast in jama'ah, to the right to have dates. Some prisons won't allow dates because they said, oh, they're going to make pruno out of it, which is basically like they have different names for it, but prisoner-made alcohol.
Yeah, and some of the prisons don't allow group prayer at all, like whatsoever, like year round. It's just it's a forbidden thing for Muslims specifically. Sabri, do you want to speak to, I guess, what was said, but then also, just your own experiences?
Yeah, personally, that was like the toughest, thing, like you said, the stuff that we take for granted so often, like the freedom to pray in Jama'ah or to pick up the Quran or to, break fast with your family at your leisure, basically. I had like kind of a shock introduction to Ramadan in prison because after my conviction, I was being transferred around, and even though I had what's called camp points, which is like the lowest points you can ever have, they treated me as like a maximum security prisoner. So I had to have like, special guards with me. I had to be in solitary confinement anywhere I went. Several times, being transferred, I was put into like the low section because of my low points, and then, I got used to it. So I'd see two officers come and, ask me to cuff up and then escort me to the SHU. Like it happened 2 or 3 times being in transit. But during that transition, that was actually Ramadan started, and I was in Oklahoma, and it's like before you're so-called classified, they won't even accept that you're saying you're a Muslim. Like you have to go to the chapel and you have to be put in the system. So they weren't even bringing me my meals on time, and like for a couple of days, I couldn't tell because they had me like in a dark cell, so you couldn't tell what time is Fajr or anything like that. So I basically had to miss, suhoor, to the point where, you know, I kind of got upset and just threw the tray at him. And, then all of a sudden they called the lieutenant and everybody came and asked what's going on. And I told them like, what happened. Then they brought the chaplain and it got straightened out. But, for a couple of days, I didn't have hardly any food. You're not allowed to keep the trays in there either. So they, I don't know what time iftar time would be. So I'd like try to postpone as much as I can, to make sure I'm doing my fast correctly. And I know I had the rukhsa to break the fast I wanted to, but I just didn't feel comfortable breaking the fast. But so yeah, it wasn't a pleasant experience to start off with. After that, I was transferred. The next Ramadan, I think I was in the CMU, which is like, higher security also. But subhanAllah, Allah, He kind of made it through the hardship some ease in it, because like the majority of the prisoners were the Muslims, so we were all fasting together, and we would pitch in, and like people that couldn't afford it would buy extra commissary, and so we'd make like our own meals in addition to the meals that they provided us. So it wasn't too bad in that aspect, but the restrictions on it is the restrictions on your activities was still there, obviously. Praying and stuff. We actually had a lawsuit. There was 2 lawsuits. I had one for the creation of the CMU itself, and the ACLU took up my case, and we kind of settled with them, and they started making rules and stuff for people to come in the CMU. And then Brother John Walker, then he had a lawsuit for the Salat, praying in Jama'ah, and he won that as well. But unfortunately, it's not being applied throughout the prisons. But we did actually win in federal court the right to have congregational prayer, because they allow other religious groups to get together and conjugate and pray. You can conjugate and play cards, where people gamble. You can play basketball also. But then when it comes to praying as Muslims, it's a security threat. So yeah, just also like previously I studied in Medina, and I'd go for every Ramadan to Mecca and try to make the tikaf, the last 10 days. And so just being away from that spirituality and that high, and going into like being in a prison cell. Another time I was under investigation, quotes, for it took them 9 months, I think 8 to 9 months to do the investigation. In the meantime, I was staying in the SHU in the solitary confinement, and I had to do Ramadan in there obviously the whole month. And it was just alhamdulillah, Allah, He gives you kind of like when you're blessing in the sense that you can focus on ibadah and worship and reading Quran and getting close to Allah. And but at the same time, as a human, you miss certain aspects of like being with other human beings, and breaking bread with people and having conversation and stuff like that. So I don't want to talk about everything, but we can go around more, inshallah, more questions if you have any other questions. Those are some of my experiences. Like, so I had good and bad experiences. Sometimes like the little pleasures that we have as Muslims, to take and like be with each other sometimes, and have food. It was allowed in certain facilities that I was at. Like they opened the chow hall for iftar. I think this is more on the East Coast a lot, because there's so many Muslims, and there was like a lot of lawsuits and a lot of like fighting for it, because when I talked to some of the elders, especially from the African American community that were new Muslims or coming Muslims in the system, they literally had to like go to battle, and some people lost their lives like to establish Islam or get some recognition for Islam in the prison system, and it's still going on till today. Alhamdulillah, it's a little bit better because there's more eyes and there's more publicity, but it's still not as equal to, like, say for example, the Jewish community, who was way less representative in the prison system than the Muslims in the prison systems. But they have their kosher meals. They have like, and again, I'm like several years out, so things might have changed, but you're probably more up to date. But we don't have like halal meals. Some people they follow certain fiqh or madhab that they're not allowed to eat except halal, and so for them it's very hard. Like they can't eat anything basically except the fish sometimes. And like I said, rights for praying together. We have scrutiny, like you were saying earlier, with the Quran. Even Islamic books, when we wanted to get some Islamic books in, there's a delay in it. They have to review it and they send it to some type of security to review everything. So it might be weeks or months before you get your material sometimes. Stuff like that. It's disappointing, but like I said, if you're patient, like I'm considered sometimes overly optimistic. It's like I try to take the good out of any situation, but there's always in the ma'al usri yusra, with hardship comes ease. So you can find some light sometimes, even in the darkest places.
Thank you so much, Sabri. And yeah, you touched upon a lot of like really important things to discuss. And I think like one thing in particular that like stands out to me is the community part of like Ramadan is like being like, even I remember before, like when we were leading up to this Ramadan, people were talking about how like difficult it's going to be because of the pandemic. And I mean, same thing for last year, but just like as far as like gathering and like not being able to gather or not being able to like have like be together in your community and just like fast and participate in like all the different things that like we Muslims do. I think that that's like something that's particularly difficult for like incarcerated Muslims. But then at the same time, like as you said, like when being in the SHU, I like asked some prisoners like what how do you like tell the prayer times as far as like when you're in the SHU, and they said like we don't, or like we kind of will try to go off of like the like change in shifts, or like the when the food tray comes in, like they like try to like note different like time signals, but like there's really no way to tell time. And you guys like, yeah, so I think that those are very I think major issues that are still plaguing Muslims in prison. And then as well as the halal meal options that you mentioned, I think that that's still very much an issue for a lot of people, not having halal meal options, but then also not having nutritious meal options like in general. So I know that like a lot of them will just go and like try to buy their own like commissary meals, but that's also expensive and pricey. So if you can't afford that, which is why like I know a lot of the prisoners I speak to are always extremely grateful for the $100 Ramadan gift, because that allows them to do that, to get some nutritious meals, which is very important when you're fasting. Does anyone have?
Just a shout out for the CCF too, like about that, mashallah. That is it is a very much appreciated gift. Like I remember the first time I was there, I think when the first time they started doing it in the CMU, and then like all the brothers were like running around saying like I got $100 from someone, and like we didn't know who it was from, and everybody was like all happy. And then we found out later, mashallah, like we got cards from CCF and everything, and it was really beautiful. It did like brighten up a lot of people, especially people that can't afford commissary. It made their life a lot easier. It was just like a nice thought that even the fact, like I try to encourage people in general, just writing a letter to somebody in prison, like it's a big deal, because it's kind of like just a touch of the outside world. Sometimes you miss it a lot.
Yeah. Somebody, can you touch up a little bit on like what the CMU is and like the differences between Ramadan when you're in the CMU, but then also when you're like in like general population?
Well, the CMU communication management unit was made basically to give extra scrutiny and monitoring to so-called high security or prisoners. But obviously, it was a majority Muslims, maybe 80%, and It's just different. Like it's changed. Also, I think a lot happened since I was gone from there. I think they were still trying to figure stuff out while I was there. But it was like definitely a place for like spying, basically. Like there were cameras everywhere. There was microphones everywhere. But we did have some type of movement. Like we were confined to this one section, which was the old death row, ironically, where they kept people for waiting for death, but they call it D unit. It was converted to the CMU. So we had that, like, I guess you can say, benefit in the sense that we weren't confined to the cell 24/7. Like the doors were open, we can go out, sometimes intermingle. There were some non-Muslims there at the time, and they were actually like impressed how peaceful it was, because some of them were coming from very maximum security prisons like that, and how the Muslims made it a very peaceful place. So we had we would share meals together at iftar time, and help encourage each other. People would share books and stuff, etc., to make it so it was a little bit different. Like while I was there, I said I don't know if it got stricter afterwards, but as Muslims, we made it like something like we couldn't be with our families, so we made each other like a family, basically. And people looked out for each other. People that couldn't afford stuff, we would get stuff for each other. There was like a camaraderie, because also it was some very highly educated people there. There was unfortunately some doctors and PhDs and people that are elderly, Muslims that were like falsely, imprisoned. So we made it as best as possible, mashallah. On the outside, it's more open. So there's a lot more movement. Like when I remember when I first got out because after the lawsuit, they let me leave the CMU and they transferred me to the main compound in Terre Haute. And it was like, people would be like, why are you always outside? Because it's just like to see the sky without having like a steel cage over you for, after like 3 or 4 years. It was just amazing, So it's a lot more freedom. And like if you start off like really restricted and you get to there, it feels a little better. So people that maybe come into the system that go straight there, they might not feel as happy or good. But I was more appreciative, of like having that extra movement and freedom to move around. And it was nice that they would allow us for Ramadan to pray at that place where I was at. We would pray Maghrib together, and then we all go to the chow hall together, from the chapel to the chow hall, and have like a communal iftar. So it was nice. It's like you miss your family and you miss the masajid that you go to, the tarawih and stuff like that, but at least you have that. So it's not all bad. And then it was a good time, and you can feel a lot of the newer converts to Islam were very appreciative of having other Muslims that have more knowledge there, and benefiting with some lectures and advice and stuff like that. So we made it, for me, it was not as bad as it could be, I guess you can say.
Thank you so much, Sabri.
You're welcome. So yeah, I experienced all three.
Go
so
ahead.
You can see CMU, medium security, high security, and the low security, and the SHU. So I've Ramadan all of those different institutions, because I was such a unique case. I was getting transferred like every other year to different security levels. I didn't make it to the camp, unfortunately, but almost. But the last place I was called Life Connections program. That's the only way I got to Virginia, like at the end of my term where my family is. It's like a religious-based program in Petersburg. And there we had like obviously a lot more freedom to pray in Jamaat and stuff like that, because it's made for religious purposes. So I kind of wanted to make the point that, obviously that if they can do it there and there's no incident whatsoever, why can't they do it like throughout the institutions, right? It's not like prayer is something that's good, that's going to inspire people to do good and be better Muslims. Like, that's one of the factors maybe we can bring up in the future.
Yeah, and it's also something, it's not an issue that any other person of any other faith has to deal with. Like no one is really like, you really don't hear of these issues happening, or like these restrictions like applying to any other religion. And it's just Islam and like the Muslim prisoners who have to deal with this. I know I've have been in communication with like more than a couple of Muslim women prisoners who are on our list. And they've like expressed a lot of, I think almost all of them have issues with hijab or like wearing hijab or being allowed to like, you know, comfortably wear it, especially when being transferred. One of them tells me that she gets transferred a lot, and every time she gets transferred, she doesn't, she's not allowed to wear her hijab. So like they take it from her. And so she's like, the transfer process takes days, like, you know, it's not like that quick, or it doesn't just happen. So she's like without it for days, but then you know, it also takes them at least days to get her belongings back at the same time. So she's at her new like, you know, facility or location, and she doesn't have her belongings yet. And this one time, you know, she said when she would bring it up, like, you know, with authorities, this one time the prison guard just threw her a paper bag and said, put this on your head. It's like, it's very dehumanizing and like absolutely disgusting. I know this, like this other prisoner, like woman was telling me that, you know, she, the warden was giving her like a very difficult time because she didn't want to put her name tag like where, or the ID badge where it's supposed to be. And so she was kind of putting it lower just because she didn't want it to rip her hijab, and like was threatening to throw her in the shoe because she wasn't complying. So it's just like, you know, sometimes it's like major things, sometimes it's little things where they just like they just make your life so much more difficult. And it's just like these like very basic things that like mean a lot to us, like, you know, as like Muslims or like just as people, as humans, like these simple things that we would have the freedom to do, we should have the freedom to do regardless, but like, you know, we don't have to think twice about. You know, that they just kind of take away and like make very difficult. And I know like a lot of them are mothers too, and it's just it's very heartbreaking and like difficult to see, like, you know, the experiences that they have to face, you know, while being incarcerated. Brother Rami, do you want to touch up on anything? Is there, you know?
Yeah, actually, I have to, mashallah, Brother Sabri, as you were speaking, I was just, it's very profound. I don't know if you've thought about writing a book about your experience, but I think you should, especially, you know, your ability to talk about some of these things and even smile, like I can see acceptance. And that it was, you know, you've turned a very unfortunate situation into a spiritual growth. And I think other people would benefit from hearing that story, because, you know, when you say 9 months in solitary confinement, you know, solitary confinement, for the viewers who aren't aware, we're talking about like an 8x10, 8x8 concrete box. In some places, the bed is even concrete, no natural light. You know, we take for granted the ability to touch grass, touch a tree, look at the sky, like somebody said, for 3 or 4 years, not even be able to say that. I mean, what does that do to the human soul? And one other thing I wanted to share this, there's a book called Prison Madness by Dr. Terry Coopers, and he's investigated, he's a PsyD up here in Berkeley, California, but he's really looked at the psychological impacts of solitary confinement on human beings. And he's highlighted how in Europe, over 3 days of solitary confinement is considered torture. But here in the US, it could be, you know, 9 months, 9 years. Or he's spoken with the Angola Three, who 2 of them, they were Black Panthers in the 60s, and they were basically put into solitary confinement as political prisoners. People don't realize that, like the SHU or solitary confinement is used to put, you know, security threats, whatever that means. And that could mean anything from, like you said, the sister's name tag or hijab, to a person's political ideologies. So there's a book called Solitary by Alfred Woodfox. He spent 40 years, 4 decades in solitary confinement. So Dr. Terry Coopers, you know, he talks about this and also talks about just the mental health crisis in prison, aside from the trauma that's occurring within prison. But one thing he made a very important point, and it builds on what somebody was sharing about his experience, which is that in the US, you know, we take for granted the Bill of Rights, the ability to congregate, the freedom of congregation, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom to practice religion. Yet in prison, all of those things can be easily wiped away. In fact, the de facto is wiping them away. There's no illegal search and seizure. There's no religious freedom. There's nothing if it constitutes a security threat. So that's an overarching term. And so you have this whole apparatus. If people want to, you know, like somebody was sharing that he was moved around even before given that I can't remember exactly what you said, but before you were given the term or the specific conviction, they were putting you in high security prisons when you were a low security. You should have been in low security. And who's overseeing that? So I spoke with one chaplain who said that there was a federal prison transferred to California state prison because they wanted him away from his community. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. You mean federal prisoner in a state prison? Like, what's going on there? They're two different systems. He's like, oh yeah, they do that sometimes. If they, the states and the federal governments, they move people around. So what Dr. Terry Cooper said is that the prison system in the United States is a laboratory for establishing an authoritarian system. Like when you talk about 2.3 million people in prison, and on parole and probation, it's up to 7 million. The wardens, the COs, the staff, the admin, that you have an entire workforce with the mindset of, I can run an authoritarian system. If I want to move people around, if I want to I'll throw you, talk back to me, I throw you in solitary confinement. There's no due process. So you have people operating in that mindset of, there's no such thing as like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. They're not operating with that. So if the United States government wanted to say, we need to have a group of people who can put that onto our citizens, they have that. That's the argument that Dr. Terry Cooper makes. So I want people, when people hear somebody sharing, 9 months in solitary confinement, that's over 3 days in Europe, it's considered torture. So and then everything being classified as a security threat. So dates are a security threat. Sisters hijab is a security threat. This term security threat can just be thrown anywhere to remove people's right to congregation, to pray in jama'ah. And and somebody, you were mentioning about the religious facility, and I'd like to hear more about that in Northern Virginia. Or was it Northern Virginia or
Petersburg, Virginia.
Oh, Petersburg. And he's saying, that this is a facility built around religious practice, and there's no issues there. So why don't they do it in other prisons? And there's evidence-based research that shows that as people become more religious in prison, their security threat, their threat to staff and fellow prisoners goes down. So why aren't they allowing for that? Dr. Byron Johnson has a book called More God, Less Crime. And he has another book where he studied the Angola Seminary. And he shows us, so the evidence is showing that more religion is better for the prison, and yet they're taking it away, especially for the Muslims. So why does, I'm not saying don't give kosher to the Jewish prisoners. They deserve that as their religious right. But how come you turn around and you say the Muslims that don't deserve it, or you can't even be on the Muslim card and get all the privileges of being a Muslim? We're not saying privileges, but the rights of being a Muslim until somebody else confirms it for you. You got to have a chaplain confirm it for you. So there's a lot going on in prison that's not known to free society.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just the amount of discretion that they have to apply the rule, to make up rules, or to there's really no strict guideline that they have to follow to be oh, this is a security threat because and this is how it qualifies as it's just oh, I have reason to feel threatened. I have reason to feel that this was this is a security threat, and therefore we can take whatever action. So there's way too much discretion on their part to do whatever they want to do. And it feels very helpless, for me in a position where prisoners will come to me with issues that they're facing, and they'll tell me what, how can they do this? What right do they have to do this? What are my rights? And it's unfortunately, it's legal and it's okay for them to do that. And it's so messed up, but we're just in a powerless position in which that's okay and that's allowed. And the prisoners just don't have the there's so many rights that they just basically don't have as virtue of being a prisoner. Does anyone have anything?
Just add into the solitary confinement, alhamdulillah, Allah, from Allah's grace and blessings, He kept me strong, and others too, people that have endured way worse than me for years at a time. But in every single, I was in a SHU, almost every facility I've been to start off with, and then get transferred into the general population because they do the investigation and stuff like that. But every single time I was in the SHU, there was a suicide. Every single institution I've been in, there is at least one suicide, and sometimes more. So there is, something inherently wrong with the system, and there is too much discretion. The guards can get away with a lot, and it never gets alhamdulillah, I had some education and I know the system, I know my rights. For example, I had what's called shots or infractions every opportunity for like very minor things. Sometimes they try to give me an infraction, and I beat every single one of them because they're all bogus. And it's just, but it's because I'm kind of educated. Alhamdulillah, I know what to do and like do the research. But there's so many others that aren't or don't have the opportunity, or don't think they have the right to question authority, and they get not only sometimes infractions, but years or months added to their sentence for nothing, right? Because it's like some of these people are, like you said, authoritarian, and they let this power get to their head, and they have the bully mentality. Maybe they're bullied as kids, or maybe I don't know what's wrong with them, but they come into this prison system trying to think that they're, the stuff, and they treat people, badly. They talk down to people. I'm not saying everyone. There's some that are really nice and decent people, beings that's doing their job correctly as they should be doing, but there is more than not sometimes people that are just very, and not only with Muslims, but with even non-Muslims. Like the whole system was an eye-opener for me from the very beginning, because if you don't experience it yourself, you can't really relate to the plight of people being in prison and what they go through. You can't relate to the plight actually being innocent and having to do time. I've seen so many cases, Muslim and non-Muslim, of people being put in prison like unjustly, for conspiracies, for refusal to cooperate, for so much thing, and getting years and years and stuff onto their taken from their lives. And I do see what you were talking about, Brother Rami, in terms of like how it's they try to make it to break down the humanity of the prisoner in general, and that people lose their dignity sometimes, and they lose their self-worth and stuff if you're not mentally strong, if you're not careful. So it's not like, if you compare the European model, like you were talking about earlier, Brother Rami, it's way different. Like their goal is rehabilitation. Their goal is like making a successful individual, right? So they actually, in some countries, the prisoners are actually like kind of like on home detention. Like they have prisons, but they go out and work. They learn job skills. They are given a stipend. And I'm talking about even serious criminals, and they're a lot of them are go back to society, are contributing members. Very few like come back to the prison. Here, it's very rare to find places that have actual programs that are going to benefit you. And you think about people that all they knew was the streets, and they don't have any education or any avenues. Like, what's going to happen to them? They're just going to come back to jail. Like, they don't know anything. But if you had a prison that can, teach you skills or give you the opportunity to learn skills, I think it would be far more productive. Like if you treat people as humans as opposed to like prisoners, with that mentality, I think you'd have a lot better, product. The same thing with that, it's that the religious program I was in, Life Connections, it had the lowest recidivism rate in the BOP. So anybody.
Brother Sabri, I think you froze for a second.
I was frozen, or you all were frozen? So yeah. Anyways, I just some thoughts that came to mind while you guys were talking. So
thank you so much. And
I'm frozen again, I bet.
I think it's you, Sabri, it's not us. I was thinking about, just like also, and what you said about like the education or having the knowledge to like challenge these like, really bogus and like ridiculous allegations that they like, put out against you. And it's just, I mean, like, I know, like, I remember like hearing about like the ways that you can challenge those things. And it's so like the way that it's built is like not to like get actual like, justice for like the prisoner, or like to actually like remedy the issue that happened. And it's just like made with these like ridiculous timelines and these ridiculous deadlines. And like, it's just like very, very like difficult to like get your like, issue resolved, and like to like kind of go through like the process. And I mean, having the education like helps, but it's just like, it's also like, it seems like pretty hard to like access the education sometimes. And then also like, just as far as like the process itself is not like an easy process, or it's not like something that like, smooths over. But like with that being said, like what are ways that you were able to like challenge some of the like, you know, the different like the discrimination that you face like as like a Muslim, like whether during Ramadan or like otherwise, but like what were ways that you've like been able to push back against like, you know, those challenges? And then also, you know, I guess I'll pose this question as well to like Rami and Zainab, just as far as like, what are ways that you've seen like, you know, prisoners that you've worked with also like push back and challenge like these like, you know, different injustices?
Sometimes also it helps that like you have organizations behind you and lawyers, so they were a little bit more careful sometimes because they know that I'm being watched. Like I have family behind me, I have organizations behind me, I have lawyers behind me, so it's going to be a big headache for them if they abuse my, you know, rights to a certain extent. A lot of stuff, it was not even like that complicated. It's just like blatant lies or falsehood. Like I was asking about, you know, property or finances that I owned, you know, in terms of asking my family what to do with certain things, and they gave me an infraction for running a business in the prison. And in the guidelines, you're allowed to discuss your assets and your, you know, your planning, family planning, and stuff like that. There's no problem with that. So I just basically showed them their own books, and you go to like a court. You can ask for witnesses. You can go, you go before their, you know. Usually it's very biased, but sometimes it's like, you know, very obvious that I was correct. And I showed them the laws, I showed them the regulations, and he dismissed it basically. But I figure sometimes people don't know to go and look up the laws. Some people don't figure that, you know, they don't have the resources of support behind them, you know, so they might, their rights might get abused. And I've seen that, you know, sometimes the people are just ignorant of their rights, and then, you know, unfortunately they sacrifice them and they get abused in the system. They get added time and etc. So, you know, the main thing is just being like looking at the regulations. When they give you a infraction, you go and find exactly all of the, you know, legal information about that infraction itself, and then you can argue against it if it's applicable or not applicable. Um, yeah, there's, it's because they have so many rules too. It's the same thing with in general, like in society. Unfortunately, this society especially, there is so many like laws that even lawyers don't know all the laws, even the judges don't know all the laws. So basically, they can have any excuse to pull you over and give you a ticket, or, you know, put you in jail or arrest you and stuff like that, you know, for frivolous stuff. That's why we're seeing all these atrocities going on, because they have so much leeway. So it's like a whole system wide, um, needs an overhaul. But the same thing happens in prison. There's so many different like rules and regulations and interpretations of the regulations that they want to be petty. They can make a prisoner's life like difficult by picking on certain things. Like even, for example, you know, say a person's pants are too long and they roll it up. Especially Muslims, sometimes they don't want to wear the pants below the ankle, for example, and you can actually get an infraction for altering the uniform, right? Stuff like that. You know, being at a certain place at a certain time, missing. They have like time moves in certain areas if you miss it, and, you know, and you're not supposed to be where you're supposed to be. Stuff like that. Like simple mistakes can be turned into like big deals that actually people get put in the shoe for it, you know, and then go into an investigation. And sometimes the investigation takes weeks or months. And they're sitting in the shoe all this time, and then, oh, it's a mistake. You can go back. You know, in the meantime, the person's stuck in the shoe. So it's not a fair system, and, you know, the whole justice system needs some type of overhaul. It's like, you know, I've seen so many sad cases, Muslim and non-Muslim.
Rami, or do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I can follow. You know, what Brother Sabri was sharing about knowing the law and it being so extensive, and you just need a lot more people to know it. That's very important, and a lot of prisoners spend a lot of time in the law library. So they'll go in there, whether it's their own case, their rights, the prisoner bill of rights, their religious rights, rights of other prisoners, cases of other prisoners, and they're just spending hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, in the law libraries. Some of them get paralegal degrees through like organizations like Blackstone that has a distance learning course for paralegal degree or certificate, I think it's called. And at the forefront of a lot of these fights are Muslims, and that's been that way since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So Muslims in prison have always been at the forefront of prisoner-led litigation, and that's a very powerful source. And sometimes they'll move those people around or throw them in solitary confinement, because those are the folks that know the law and can push back on frivolous infractions and frivolous disciplinary or unfounded disciplinary actions and so forth. So one of the things we've recently done at Tayba in our correspondence education is ask our students who amongst them are doing that work and how can we support that for the prisoner-led litigation, like purchasing the books or sponsoring Blackstone legal courses, and even having a newsletter amongst them, because there's even special legal rights that what do they call it, practicing law without a degree. But for prisoners, at least in some states, they allow them to consult with each other on their cases. So there's some room to work with. So as a community, helping that effort that's going on in prison, the prisoner-led litigation, and then when they come out into free society, rather than them just go to get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers, which I'm not saying anything about, for having a job once you come out of prison is very important. So we tell our students, if you can't find anything, go down to McDonald's and flip burgers, get a job. It's one of the main things that can prevent people from going back to prison. Stable income, stable housing, and stable family and community connections. Those are the three main things. So we say, get the job. But what if, as they come out, they're able to work with organizations like CCF or CARE or Muslim Advocates or ACLU or so forth, and there are cases of that. So I would say that whole process, supporting them while they're in prison with that, and then when they come out, and then the organizations on the outside, like somebody was saying, that speaks volumes. Having organizations, even just that the prison knows that there's somebody on the outside that's a voice for them. I'll give you an example, a recent example. One of our students who served 30 years on a sentence, and he was given life with the possibility of parole. But in California, just systematically, they just deny. And on simple things, not on the original crime. It could be like one of those disciplinary actions, that might have been something like changing your uniform. Oh, you got it. So this brother goes up for parole. They don't have anything against him. And then they say, oh, it's, we have a confidential informant. That's the other thing. They can deny you your parole based on confidential informants, which snitches who just say whatever they want to, and snitches sometimes connotes that the person's actually reporting something that's true. Well, they could just make something up. So the confidential file, the confidential informant, then they deny you your parole based on what's in the confidential file that you don't even know. So that happens sometimes. In this case, he actually they said, oh, it's because you're connected to an extremist organization. You're studying, and there was two Islamic organizations that he was studying with. One was our organization. So I went on the call to advocate for his parole, and I said, by the way, if you guys, the California Departments of Corrections Rehabilitation, are saying that we're an extremist organization, why aren't you contacting Homeland Security and FBI? In fact, I'm going to initiate the call to Homeland Security and FBI because I know we're not an extremist organization. They've actually visited us. We refused to talk to them without a lawyer, but they said, great work that you're doing, great work. So the FBI knows about us and the work that we're doing, and yet they will say, oh, extremists, which that's not a state issue, that's a federal issue. So I told them on the call, and the secretary of the whole board of parole, she was on there. I said, I will initiate the call and say, what is this connection to Tayba that you're denying him on, saying it's an extremist organization? Because that's not us. Well, then all of a sudden that goes away. It's no longer an extremist organization. It's a disciplinary action from 7 years ago for accepting money onto his books for another prisoner, which is illegal. And we tell our students, don't do that. And be careful, with that, because they could deny your parole. But now because he accepted $50 and $50 from another prison who owed restitution fees, which we also tell them, like, if somebody owes restitution fees, that's somebody's haq. They need to pay that off. Don't try to circumvent the system, because you're hurting them and you're hurting the haq of the people. In any case, $100, and now they're going to deny his parole. And they made that disciplinary action from 7 years ago, one day before his parole hearing. So all of this stuff is happening, and so that's why it's really important, like the work of CCF, Muslim Advocates, Believers Bailout. And then the other thing is too, our organizations collaborating, and network, and that makes us that much stronger. So if there's somebody that comes across, writes to Tayba, and we can, and it's a bail issue, I can call Believers Bailout. If it's a, political prisoner type issue, call CCF. If it's a statewide issue, call CARE. That this is really good that, that these organizations, alhamdulillah, because 20 years ago in the US, this wasn't the case, but now we have this.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Rami. Probably maybe the most important part of the webinar is like discussing ways to help. Like currently, and just that I know that Muslims will often feel very motivated to help during Ramadan, which is great and like it's wonderful. But I also want to like, alhamdulillah, like, we made this like webinar towards like the last 10 days so that, I feel like people will end their Ramadan strong, but then also like use that to like propel them into like, helping and doing more throughout the rest of the year and not just during Ramadan. And so, like one thing that you said, Sheikh Rami, was that like, just the like people knowing is plenty of help. Like when they know that someone like has family members who are watching, they know that they have like an organization who's checking in, they know that they have like a good, even like a good lawyer makes obviously makes the world of differences. But yeah, like I know just like, being able to call and say like, hey, like what's happening with this? Why can't I communicate with like, this person, like what's going on with like, all these different issues, it makes them like act differently. Sometimes it doesn't help much, but I mean, it's like, it definitely, like in most cases, they'll pick on the people that they know no one is watching, or like no one is actually asking about, or no one cares for, or like no one cares to know about. So that's like, I know that's like one thing. And oftentimes like CCF might like post campaigns in which like, we do call-in campaigns, or like write a letter to the warden, asking about a certain like, prisoner, just because like, they're facing a hard time, or they're facing what like, so-and-so difficulties. And I know that like, that's one way to help. Another way, kind of like what somebody said before, was like, just receiving a letter, like, especially like, during Ramadan, from someone is like a great way to help a prisoner. But I want to kind of go one step further and say like regular correspondence with prisoners is like super important, especially when you're talking about like prisoners who don't really necessarily see an end in sight, or like, an extremely long sentence ahead of them. That like social connection that's like dependable, and that's that's consistent and very authentic and genuine, in which you are not just like talking to someone, but like you're genuinely befriending this person, is a really important way to support prisoners. In CCF, we just rebooted our pen pal program that you can join. Please like email us if you want more details about that, but we have like an orientation that you can watch, and then we can match you with one of our prisoners to become like a regular pen pal, in which like you talk to a prisoner. Many of the prisoners have expressed to me like how important it is to have like regular correspondence with people. And that's like, I think, one of the biggest ways that you can support a Muslim prisoner, especially when you don't have like the means to support them financially. So like you can definitely like, like become a pen pal, and like just like be a good friend to them, like support them like socially, emotionally, even like religiously, as far as like, getting them resources, like when like, just like, doing a little bit of research for them if they have like a question, just like, figuring stuff out like from your end if you can. That's like those things like, help them immensely. So that's like, one thing that I'm thinking about. Also, CCF is also collecting zakat donations. If you guys like, mention in your checks that that this is your zakat, like we will make sure that those funds go to our prisoner sponsorship programs, where we give financial funds to prisoners who are in need. Yeah, and Rami, if you also want to talk about like, ways to support the Tayba Foundation, and like, doing, I know like one of the most like, I want to say like the two top things that prisoners will ask me for is, a pen pal, or like, someone who to regularly correspond with, but then also like educational materials and like Islamic materials or Islamic questions for me to like search for them, which is why I'll definitely be emailing you with some questions. But
and we'll be sending you some pen pal requests.
Please. Yeah. So how can people support your work, and making it so that prisoners can, yeah.
I would say the main thing is really just to become aware. So if somebody's not aware of the entire, just like what's going on in the prison, just learn a little bit more about it. Watch the documentary, The 13th. It's available. I think it's still available on Netflix. If not, it's available for free viewings. Bring that to your community. Understand what's going on in mass incarceration. There's a lot of books, magazines, and articles that are online, that are available, videos and so forth. So just to kind of understand, because at the end of the day, we're taxpayers, right? And so it's our taxes that are subsidizing the mass incarceration in the prison, just like the military industrial complex. So we have an extra obligation to know where our money is going, and try to and do our best to advocate to change those systems. That's what I would say the main thing. In terms of specifically supporting Tayba, I would say as well, build awareness, look at what we're doing online. There's a lot of, we share a lot of stories, and there's different ways that people can get involved, whether it's volunteering. There's financial donations, of course, through the website if somebody feels compelled to do that. But I'd also just like to add just one general advice. And, as a community, as we're growing, like I said, 20 years ago, we didn't have all these different communities that are really niche organizations. Just on this, this panel that's represented, alhamdulillah. But also to remember that, there are innocent people in prison. There are political prisoners in prison. There are people who did crimes and they've changed. They've completely changed their lives. The majority of people in prison are in there for nonviolent drug offenses. So that's also to take into consideration. At the same time, we also have people who have not changed. And so they have committed crimes. But when we deal with them, we're looking at two ways. One, that their religious rights and access to religious rights is separate from the crime that they committed. And that's what their human rights, their religious rights, and so forth. And so we advocate for those, given the Quran, if somebody says, well, they're a criminal, well, they still deserve that. That's one of the main ideas. If you look at even the founding principles of prisons in this country, Ben Franklin and other, they actually developed it on the monastery model where in fact, the word penitentiary comes from penance, same where we get repentance. It's the idea of Toba, right? So how can we get people to go through a process of Toba and really change? So for us as Muslims to support that, in our communities, have methods that, if somebody comes home with a substance use issue that got them into prison, we need to have groups in the masajid. Churches have groups in the masajid, support groups. Synagogues have that. We need that in our masajid, and we're doing some work with that in the communities through Tayba. And there's other organizations as well. We need people to become substance abuse counselors, to be able to Muslims and say, how can I speak about substance abuse to Muslims in a Muslim environment without all the stigma and so forth, and look at it as an illness and a struggle that this person, they may be self-medicating for trauma that they experience. And there's a whole host of issues around that. And as people come home, some people do come home with they have not changed. And so how can we as Muslims accept this person and say, okay, we know you've done something, you've paid your time, but we're going to do our best to help keep you on the path of Toba and of this change. But just recognize that, in prison, you have all of that, you have the innocent, you have the political prisoners, you have people who have committed crimes and change, you have the nonviolent drug offenses, which, the nonviolent drug offenses, somebody can drink alcohol or sell alcohol, they're not in prison. But somebody smokes, a crack cocaine or snorts a line or something, ecstasy, LSD, and they're in prison. As a Muslim, for us, what's worse, alcohol or drugs? Alcohol is worse. We don't accept drugs. It's a mind-altering substance, so we don't accept it. But on the scale of what's worse, so in our mind, somebody who sells or consumes alcohol is the same level of a criminal as somebody who's incarcerated. So when somebody comes home from that, why would we treat the brothers who sell liquor or drink liquor and come to the masjid? We treat them differently than we treat somebody who comes home from prison just because they're in prison. So there's a lot of education and stigma removal and awareness building that we need to do within our Muslim communities to welcome home people, but at the same time not be overwhelmed and not be taken advantage of, and be able to help out properly.
Thank you, Rami. I just want to also emphasize ways or if you're interested in joining the Pen Pal program, make sure you email me. So it's just my first name, nada@civilfreedoms.org. You can email me and get more information on how you can join the Pen Pal program. And then also, I guess, I got some written responses from prisoners just about their own experiences, and so, or what they would say that we can do to kind of help them more. And what one of them kind of said to me was, I'll kind of just read it out, where he said that, prisoners can support incarcerated Muslims, year round and also during Ramadan by upkeeping persistent communication with Muslim prisoners and assisting their needs as requested. Via telephone, email, or regular mail. And there's if you want help learning how to do that, just join. I know we call it a Pen Pal program, but we can definitely assist you in becoming more of an aid to the prisoners, more than just corresponding to them about their day. if that's like something you're interested in. And he said that, you know, we need more people on the outside who know the law, who are involved in Islamic businesses or involved in like, you know, different, like have different like areas of knowledge who can take up our rights and like, you know, who can take up these issues for them and can assist them in all these different aspects. So I know, like, you know, like what you said, Brother Rami, about, you know, us needing to be able to like welcome them and support them like as they come home. A lot of the prisoners are interested in learning like how to manage their finances, how to like, you know, start up like, you know, like when they want to get out, like what are like different university education options that they have because they want to go back to school. You know, like a lot of them were basically kids when they went to prison, especially like as far as like CCF goes. A lot of them were targeted when they were like very, very young and went to prison when they were young. And so they like, you know, are barely getting their lives started, you know, as they get out. They you know, want to kind of learn everything, you know, from new because they didn't really get the chance to learn things that you would generally learn in your 20s. So if like, you know, if you can be that support for prisoners, like, you know, please feel free to email me. Again, that's nada@civilfreedoms.org. Does anyone else have anything else to add before we end? I don't know if there's, I think there, yeah, it's difficult to pull up any questions right now, but yeah.
Well, actually, you made an excellent point, Nada, about the financial the piece, because that's one of the main elements to reduce recidivism. So, you know, we can look at it at the macro level and say, okay, what systemic change do we need to have to this system? But at the end of the day, if somebody walks out of prison, even before we change the system as a society, as a country, you know, that person needs what they need to not go back into the prison. If we can give them the fighting chance, because the rates of return, the recidivism rates is 70 to 90%. So it's a revolving door. And one of the main components is money. And like you said, you know, they go in young, and maybe they were involved in criminal activity. So they weren't the people mowing lawns and having paper routes or, you know, babysitting or whatever it might be to make some money, budget their money. They were doing various things on the side. Or maybe they were, but I'm speaking from experience from some folks, and they come back, they've never had that experience, 20 years in prison, 15 years in prison. And so just getting a job, writing a resume, budgeting, purchasing within their means, not overextending their credit, all of those things. So if there are any listeners who have that savviness, you know, I can be a financial coach, and there's some, you know, it doesn't take an expertise. You just want to coach this person, like, you know, help them be their buddy, so to speak, and just like a person's parent or sibling, older sibling or uncle figure or auntie figure might have helped them learn how to budget and so forth, you know, that they could be do that for them, helping in resume writing and just be there for them when they because unfortunately we've had some of, you know, even our students, they come out and we try to support them with housing and getting a job and supporting, but then when it gets really tight, they might fall back on the way they know how to make money, the quick way, the easy way, which is most likely an illegal way, and then they go back to prison. So that would be a huge help, that anybody listening, you know, you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a PhD or a sheikh or a teacher or a sheikh or so forth to help this person. Just somebody with a little bit of financial savviness, and you could coach that would go a long way.
Yeah, and mind you, any skill that you do have like would be of use to them. So like even if it's like, you know, if you do have Islamic knowledge, that's also very much appreciated amongst them. And I know like they love to have those discussions like with you know, with people. Yeah, thank you all so much for attending, and thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. I wish we could thank somebody, but it's okay. I'll send him a message. Oh, there he is. Somebody, you're muted.
Sorry,
You're
I'm
good.
here actually. I just had to deal with some stuff real quick. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. Do you have anything you want to add before we close? Just as far as supporting prisoners while they're, you know, through their incarceration during Ramadan or outside of Ramadan?
Sorry, just you know, like you were saying about writing and in general, you know, it's especially as for our month of Ramadan, it's a good time to make dua, and just making dua for the incarcerated around the world, not only here in the US, but around the world. You know, May Allah relieve their stresses and free those that are unjustly incarcerated, and give relief, to them and their families, inshallah. This, remember, because, it's a ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like freedom, the ability, to move around, the gifts that we have in general, like, just a simple fact of being able to go to the faucet when you want, or go to the restroom when you want, or, things like that. Just be thankful to Allah for all the bounties we have, and remember those that are less fortunate than us. Like it is like, alhamdulillah, the work that you all are doing is a noble work. You're helping those that are, from the forgotten in society, and those that are less fortunate. So just to continue what you're doing and bringing awareness, inshallah, and remembering them in du'as. And like I said, just something as simple as a letter means a lot to a prisoner. It's just they're kind of like a touch of the outside world. Sometimes the prisoners really miss and crave that type of humanity, and that type of like reminder of that there are people in the outside world, that somebody thinking of me, so that means a lot, and it goes a long way, and it's not much for us to do. So I appreciate you all also for having me, inshallah, and I'm glad to meet you all again, some of you again.
Likewise, it was an honor to meet you, Sabri, and I look forward to getting to know you more and sharing experiences as Islamic study teacher. I taught kids for a number of years, so love to learn from your experience and what you've seen. And I look forward, if you haven't intended the book, I look forward to reading,
I intended
maybe it called Sabri's Patience,
I intended it, and then subhanAllah, I started it, and then it just, the dunya, subhanAllah, gets you so distracted. But I really make dua for me, inshallah, I can accomplish it, and it will be a benefit for others, inshallah. Like, it's also like a unique story, because I grew up here. Like, I went, I was born and raised here, and I went to school here. I went to even like a Catholic school growing up, and I had a kind of a unique experience of studying overseas as well, and living, the Western and the Islamic type of identities, you can say. So it's like a whole thing. I have an idea in my head. Just make dua for me that I can kind of put it and onto paper, inshallah, and share it. And thank you for the encouragement, Brother Rami.
Inshallah. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Rami. Thank you, Sabri. And thank you so much to our viewers. Please, like somebody said, keep our prisoners in your du'as, the prisoners of the United States, but then also, worldwide. And also your donation to all of our organizations would definitely mean a lot. And if you still are yet to give zakat, please consider giving zakat to Believers Bailout, or Coalition for Civil Freedoms, who are both organizations that you can give zakat to. Thank you so much. Yeah, that wraps it up, I guess.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Wa alaikum
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum.